Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. This is episode 24, where this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am very well for IS. How are you?
Yeah, I'm going pretty well, and we've got an interesting topic today:
Mm,
self-interest. So. I actually went on a holiday quite recently, and whilst I was on the holiday, I actually got this very interesting book, Beyond Self-Interest. And this actually ties into market forces and what ends up actually being successful in our society. And it turns Adam Smith's idea of, competition, working within market forces, those kind of ideas. And he uses this example of the Brooklyn Baker, where, oh, I do passion over profits. I just really love the idea of baking, and I'm so passionate about it. And what's interesting about this example he uses is that the foundational thing about Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations is that within a market, people are naturally self-interested.
right.
But this disinterested person, if you will,
Mm,
is actively trying to show that no, I love what I do, and as you can see, people believe in my products. They believe in my passion for baking, and
mm.
what's interesting about this is it exposes the paradox of intention that's actually found in market forces. And just as a bit of a disclaimer to anyone that's listening to this podcast episode today, this is going to be a far more philosophical heavy episode. But I think it's actually very interesting what this guy, uh, Kozatov Perlek, actually points out is that. Um, this is actually this paradox of intention has actually been thrown, or at least it can be seen throughout all of history. Because what he actually goes into is around Adam Smith's time, the aristocrats were starting to see this idea of their commodities, what they were actually producing within I guess, the rise of capitalism, of products, products are not things within themselves. They're not intrinsic, but they're valued for their instrumental value. So he goes into this big talking point of, well, an aristocrat could have had a tin spoon if they really wanted to, but the silver spoon showed status. So it wasn't necessarily having the silver spoon was good within itself. The only thing that made it valuable was the fact that it showed social status.
Okay.
And he then goes into this huge idea about Thornstein Veblen and the idea of the Veblen treadmill, that as soon as you have a certain mentality within an in-group and an out-group, when you try and set these kind of social games, all you do is speed up on the treadmill, and soon the idea gets thrown out, and then a new in crowd is created. And I guess we can kind of explore this idea, and I can go into his ideas in more detail. But I thought he rose a very interesting point, that it's those people that, instead of thinking about their bottom line, this might be more of a small to medium business sort of idea, but those that don't worry about their bottom line, that don't worry about their profits, and really try to be disinterested within society and focus on their passions, are going to be far more successful. And
Right.
yeah, and these are the kind of ideas that I thought we should kind of discuss today, because what I found quite interesting is within this, there's also an analysis of, because once he kind of sets up this paradox of intention, he talks about, well, suddenly disinterest is like trying to show that you're disinterested um, is really important within society. So the first kind of people that you encounter are the fakers. So what the fakers are is, oh, the people that try to show that they're the Brooklyn bakers, the artists that you should buy their organic products and all of that. But because they actually are far, they seem to be focusing on this intention rather than their passions, they're kind of called out immediately. So he uses the idea of the humble brag. So when someone says, "Oh, I'm just as surprised as you that I got this award. I get to speak in front of all of these people. How amazing is that?" And what he establishes is the faker is a tragic hero because people clue in to what they're doing. And even though they're trying to be disinterested within a marketplace or a niche, people kind of realize that they're a faker, so they kind of doomed to fail. And then there's the opposite side of this, which is the sellout. And the idea that they use in this is you're the favorite brand, favorite band that you grew up, but they become way too big, and market forces become far more, far too enticing to them, and they eventually sell out and they become too big. And uh, again, there's kind of actors and reactors where not only do you have these people that are working in an instrumental and a disinterested way, but there's also an equal audience that is trying to suss out whether they're legitimate, passionate people or whether they're fakers and sellouts. And then we actually kind of get to the crux of what this theorist is actually getting at is the successful people in society. So the people that are able to get beyond Adam Smith's wealth of nations, that really at the end of the day that society isn't all about self-interest, is that they resist the intelligence intelligently. So what he ends up showing is that the paradox of this intention paradox, those people that are actively just doing something else, and then they end up getting those byproducts. So almost instead of looking for the byproduct, they actually work on a different product, and then just naturally they get the byproduct. Those are the successful people in society. So what he uses is the idea of the struggling novelist that happens to be standing in a shopping line, and then they get a good idea that eventually leads to their best-selling book. He also uses the idea of old Japanese poets that would sit in the forest in the open head toilets and write haikus, and that was some of their best work. And what he found is that when people focus on their intention too much, it actually stops them from producing their full work, and actually market forces punish them for that because people kind of see through that intention quite a lot. And you almost have to trick your intentionality within your mind in order to get what you're passionate about on the piece of paper or whatever you're trying to do. And I don't know, I just thought that that kind of spoke with some of the things that we've kind of talked about previously, that it was an interesting, like, out of the box take of some ideas that we've talked about before. Like, what do you think about those sort of ideas?
Well, I need some clarification, I must admit.
Yes.
So I'm struggling to understand exactly what this person is promoting. Are they promoting the fact that if you engage in something for the sake of that thing, like to actually just enjoy yourself, be in the moment, and be engrossed in an activity, then if you engross yourself enough in that and genuinely, then the byproducts of that process will end up doing you well in the market system. But if you go in with the mentality just to get the byproducts, and it doesn't matter what you engross yourself with and engage with, as long as you get the byproducts, you'll never get the benefit from that, from the market society. Without that genuine intention, then you're running around looking for the byproducts and you're never going to get anywhere. Is that what we're talking about here? Is
Yeah,
that the
yeah. Like,
position?
I'll use an example, maybe one example from my life. Then, so the kind of when he was talking about the resisting the intelligence intelligently, this was actually one of the very first performances I did with you, Mr. A.
Okay.
And I, nine times out of 10, I would do DJing. I would kind of get within the flow state, and I would feel like my performance would be based on, me going up on stage, me knowing what I was doing, and whilst I was, just going, not only going through the motions, but at least feeling how I was going to play the next song or how I was going to mix certain things in. Once I was in within that flow state, everything just kind of became quite natural for me to do my performance. But then in that first performance that I did with you, I kind of realized the gravitas of the performance, that it was my first time actually performing in that sort of space. And because I um almost because I was putting too much pressure on myself, because I knew, uh, you could say, the weight of the performance on me, I wasn't really putting myself in the right headspace. So my intentionality was actually getting in the way of my passion or my performance.
Right.
So what I
So instead
found,
of concentrating on the process or the means, you were thinking about the ends and the product
yes.
and like making sure that was nailed, as opposed to actually being in the right state of mind to allow yourself to flow enough to then nail something,
Yes.
because you were just thinking about the result as opposed to what it is you were doing in the moment.
Yes, and I think
And
I
how does this translate though to society and what we're talking about? I mean, is this just a bit of self-help kind of discussion here, or are you saying this has ramifications for how a market economy plays out?
well, I think what was interesting about this is it seems like it was um simple but complex, because what he ended up saying, which he kind of gets to at the end of the book, is, well, if this kind of intentionality, this can actually progress itself not only within economics, but also within politics, and how we kind of relate with people, um, in our society, because he kind of talks about how this kind of resisting the intelligently, um, because people are quite in tune with their reactions to see people's intentions within society. Uh, if you I guess if you have the confidence in your process and also the confidence of what you're doing, especially the belief in what you're doing, then you can you can influence people within society. Like it did, look, it does sound like self it's self-intuitive and that you shouldn't really need to speak it, but just the way he kind of describes it in society, and he almost gives like 101 examples on just this one thing and it was just kind of remarkable how it just this wheel just kept on happening again and again and again. I just thought it was quite fascinating.
Right, right. But like in as far as the idea though that if you work on something and you're creating and you're doing it for the sake of passion or whatever is driving you, that is not based on an intention of getting to an end product, whatever that may be, but like living in that process and just doing it for the sake of it, being driven by whatever energy propels you to do
Hmm.
something creatively, for the love of it, or for whatever motivation outside of actually getting some direct financial benefit out of it or some glorification out of it or
Hmm.
anything like that, anything that would be yeah, considered to be outside of or external to the process. Um, that has implications for how our society is run, though. Is that what like is that
Yes.
the translation that's happening in there in terms of, why we're bringing this into a revolutionary think tank podcast type of discussion? Because like that's exactly right there, and very fundamentally a liberal and Marxist kind of critique of capitalism. And Adam Smith would have been down with that to a certain extent, even though he might not have criticized it as such. He might have just understood it and like labeled it. But Marx, I think, would have been a very um, ardent critic of that component of capitalism, is the commodification of all things, and the consumer drive that comes from living in a market society. And so humans are continually making the choice, and in a majority of cases,
Hmm.
a very vast majority of cases, humans have to decide to sell their labor power, so their creative drive, their energy, they have to sell that. They bottle it up and sell it to the highest bidder in return for a wage, as opposed to creating things that are of value to them. But it
Yes.
sounds like in a market society, really, if you look at the people that actually do that, though, they don't sell themselves to the highest bidder, but just are disinterested with the machine, with the establishment, with the status quo, and kind of play the game that's in front of them and play by their own rules. Those people actually, or eventually, do better than the people that kind of just sell themselves to the highest bidder and bottle their energy maybe for an end product, which is a wage. Okay, I'll sell myself for $150,000 a year because you know what, that sounds pretty nice. It's not what I want to do, and I
Hmm.
feel trapped in it. But like it's $150,000. Why not? Or maybe the prestige that comes with
Hmm.
being in this type of occupation. I want to be like that in some way. I want to have the drive the flashy car. I want to have the expensive suit and all that sort of stuff. So if I engage in this occupation, not that it's really a passion of mine or have any interest in it at all, but
Hmm.
I'll engage in that, and then maybe I'll be happy because of that. But you know, the process in of itself is unsatisfying completely, and eventually soul crushing and
Yeah.
demoralizing. and it doesn't end up having the same byproducts, or the byproducts that you intended that it would have
Mm,
don't turn out to be as wonderful as you thought they were. And so the intention gets in the way eventually, and you kind of run out of time and you get trapped in some world that, yeah, you thought was going to be one thing and it ends up being something else. And that is a big
mm,
complex and a big critique of capitalism, something which I think is actually quite lost today,
mm,
and was lost, immediately, almost like within a few generations of the capitalist system really being a broad-reaching and dominant economic and political system across the world. Because even the original, I guess, wage workers that were being converted from whatever else they were doing, whether it be living on the land or being in guilds or just being independent, a lot of the
mm,
critique of the capitalist system came from the people that were obviously in the big industrial nations that were driving capitalist society, and they were the first ones to really look at like the idea of having to alienate yourself from the stuff that you want to do and you want to create, and the
mm,
time that you want to spend in your life and you following your passions. They were the first people to look at that system, that wage system, and just be horrified by it. Like today,
mm.
we might make remarks about, the 9 to 5 and, being trapped in the system and all that sort of stuff. But they were completely horrified by it, and compared the idea of not following your passion and just looking at the end product or thinking about the gains that can be made, as opposed to the self-satisfaction and the ownership and the autonomy of being an individual who chooses what to do,
Mm.
and like trading that all in for something else as a form of slavery,
Yeah.
the ultimate degradation of the human spirit and the human form. So um, these are core and very fundamental ideas to like Adam Smith's liberal ideals
Mm.
and Marxian notions, if I've understood what you're talking about correctly.
No, I think I was bogged down in the ideas of um, the difference between the kind of self-interest commerce, as this guy likes to call it, and the
Mm,
disinterest commerce. But yeah, it's very much this book uh is caught in that kind of liberal mentality, because
mm,
I think he's not really going out much from the capitalist system, because the whole point of this book is the idea of, well, hey, we have these market forces. This Brooklyn baker that espouses that he's a disinterested, loves to bake, suddenly he's making all of this money. Why is that? Why is that the case? And I think you raise a very very good point that maybe should be added to this kind of idea, is that he is looking at it from a very utopian way, in the sense of, definitely what he focuses on the book is well, you have an artist that's painting in their studio. You have a baker that's baking their bread. It's all very artisan, or at least very lovely and fluffy professions. Like, he
yeah.
never actually goes into the a factory worker and that sort of thing. And maybe to kind of use his framing to what you were kind of saying before, maybe this can be adjusted to a more working people idea. And what you were kind of saying before is, people could end up working towards the disinterested commerce, or work towards their passion by almost basically dividing up, what is their work and what is their passion. And
Mm,
what I want to discuss is the idea of what you were saying before, like almost using that kind of alienation to your advantage. And there's a term that a lot of people use nowadays. I think it's called quietly quitting. So
okay.
it's the idea of a lot of businesses, like, yes, you do a 9 to 5, but there's a lot of different parts to you working within when the working day that there's a lot of extra parts. So you setting up meetings and kind of going the extra mile in order to help out your work. Like, it's technically not in your job description,
Yeah.
but there's all these extra things that you have to do in order to get the job done. So now what quietly quitting is, hey, my job description is points 1 to 10. I'm only going to stick with that. If there's anything outside of that, um I'll probably try and bat that off to somebody else,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to do anything else apart from that. And the other point to kind of consider to maybe this discussion is the idea of a side hustle. So, obviously you have your 9 to 5, and where you're passionate is in your side hustle. So the thing that, whether that's creating I don't know, wood in a shop, or whether it's doing a podcast like something like this,
Yeah. Yeah.
and where you kind of put all of your disinterest or all of your energy in is that kind of side hustle, and you kind of put that sort of minimal effort into your actual 9 to 5. Now,
Mm.
again, this probably might go into what you were saying before. Maybe that's a byproduct of being in a capitalist society, and really, at the end of the day, you should be doing what you're passionate about anyway, rather than you being alienated from your work.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe that's a criticism of this guy's take, is that maybe he comes from a scenario where him having this very utopic idea of artisans baking their bread or painting on a canvas is very removed from the world.
Mm. Mm. Well, like, it depends, I guess, and I don't know the context of the book well enough or
Mm,
at all. So I'm relying on you here. But I guess it depends, though, what type of point he's making with the examples that he is providing, obviously. And so, like, if you look at self-interest and like how that works in a market society, and Adam Smith was a big proponent of this. I don't think he really ever advocated that, like, people are naturally self-interested only, and that's what drives a market economy. I think a lot of the argument that Smith had was that people bring their self-interests with them to a market setting because they do obviously have things that they need to attain or they need to achieve by
mm,
transaction or an exchange. And so it is allowing, in a free society, those people to come together with self-interest in a way that is as equal as possible, because equality is a big thing for liberal societies, removing that class distinction that you were talking about before with
mm,
the between the tin versus the silver spoon, removing the silver spoon ideology and culture from a transaction. So people, if they're going to come together with their self-interest, which is not a
mm.
bad thing in this context, self-interest is just the driving force behind the exchange. It's not the driving force of the entire economy.
Yes.
And that's kind of where I think there's a lot of problems with modern capitalism, and consumer culture, is that people think that the entire driving force of the global economy, of your local economy, of your national economy, is that people are self-interested and will
Mm,
just screw each other, to get like the best thing that they can get out of any situation. And that's what makes the world go round. No, two self-interested individuals coming together as equals creates
Mm,
a good and healthy marketplace and a free marketplace. People screwing each other over and using their power to do so creates an unequal and unfree marketplace. It creates a very constrained marketplace. It's
mm,
complete opposite of like the intention of free market principles and like capitalism as an ideology, not capitalism in practice
mm,
at all. And so, like, if this person is talking about like the difference between self-interest, then I guess, and disinterest, and like how that, I guess, comes together. People, self-interested individuals that are engaging in a market economy, and then
mm,
those players that are disinterested in the system, being the ones that I guess get the most benefit out of it. It is a very interesting notion, though, because if they're looking at it from the framework of modern capitalism, that like, everyone's self-interested and they just butt up against each other and basically take advantage. The whole system is just people taking advantage of things over and over and over and over again, and only looking at
mm,
that end product, or looking at things as just the ends, never looking at the means themselves. Then yeah, being disinterested as opposed to self-interested is quite an interesting position to be in. And it puts somebody at odds with the mainstream. And if you are at odds with the mainstream for long enough and you're producing things, then you might be able to create some type of a counterculture or something that's unique. And in a consumerist society, um, a unique commodity has a high exchange value. Or it might even have a high use value.
mm.
But like it definitely has a high exchange value and you can put a high price on that. And so I guess just as a result, and yeah, just yeah, as a product of what their actions are doing, being counterculture and just following their own passions, they end up creating things that are desirable and people want to get a
Mm,
hold of them. So it is a very interesting concept, but it is based on maybe not even utopian ideals, was what you were talking about before, but it's based on this idea of capitalism, which I think is a very modern idea of capitalism, where it's just dog eat dog world kind of stuff, which was never the intention of what Adam Smith was talking about. Like he recognized the dog eat dog nature of capitalism and he was a heavy critique or critic, sorry, of that type of
mm.
stuff. He was always looking how to make that utopian capitalism, which
Yeah,
is like making sure you regulate markets where you need to stop people from monopolizing and taking advantage of each other and all that sort of stuff. So you have people that can come together at that individual level
yeah,
and make their exchanges at the individual level, not like the individual versus like Amazon or
yes.
or the individual versus McDonald's or something like that. That
Mm,
is, David and Goliath stuff we're talking about here, which is completely unfair and unrealistic. And like they're completely against that. So if
yeah.
you're a disinterested individual when you're coming up against someone like Amazon, or you're coming up against some multinational company or the system that is just well beyond any means that you could fight against, and you become disinterested, at the end of the day, that's your only challenge to that system. That's your only weapon. That's your only pause. And your only reproach is to be disinterested because you can't influence them any other way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but you do raise some very good points with what you were kind of talking about before, because I think base wise with this book, I feel like this guy, does take for granted the idea that within a capitalist system, there's competition, there's the fight for profit within a society. But I think he just stops right before the line before he starts kind of critiquing this idea. He's basically just coming from the idea of, hey, I've noticed these set of ideas that um where we keep on being told again and again and again that people are self-interested. I've seen these actors within this market system where they act disinterested and they are far more successful. Let's analyze that. Like, what's the reason behind that? But I think he just stops before your criticisms of what you just talked about, which is probably really interesting talking points. Because if you accept the idea that people are just self-interested actors within an economy, well, actors within that economy get away with some very bad behavior. And again, I'm going to be bringing up Mariana Mazzucato, but this is a very interesting point that she makes in her book. In The Value of Everything, she talks about in quite detail about Milton Friedman and his ideas of maximizing shareholder value. And the thing is, when you analyze it, like, what happened leading up to the 2008 crisis, global financial crisis, and afterwards, CEOs, private equity firms, venture capitalist firms, they were getting away with very bad behavior, and that all stemmed from I guess this misplaced trust in self-interest pushing those economies. And yeah, he like actually it gets to the point where Mariana is describing this situation that because markets as well as companies want to drive up their earnings per share. So basically the prices of their share, because price dictates value within, and value dictates price within that speculative scenario, because they want to basically raise the earnings per share. The companies do some very bad behavior, including the CEOs, where because they're kind of buying back shares and increasing their prices instead of, say, for example, looking into research and development and like new technology for their company. But basically, the actors within the company are incentivized to do, well, not necessarily bad things with their money, but very questionable things. And at the end of the day, the managers or the CEO in this case, for example, if the CEO loses his job, well, his or her job, they've got this thing called a golden parachute. So basically what it is it's a payout because you lost your job. It's like stuff like that. And that's what's very interesting about, say, for example, agency theory. So just shortly for people, agency theory is the idea that, well, shareholders or the principals, they actually don't know what's going on in a company, what the managers do. So we all have to maximize shareholder value. But what that's actually done progressively within society is, because shareholders want the most out of their shares within a company, and because managers want to raise the earnings per share, it's increasingly forced this short-termist idea onto everything. And CEOs' tenure within companies has decreased, earnings per share has gone up. Like they were saying that in I think it was the 1970s, the stat of I forget what the specific term is called, but it's basically how often within a year a company, on average, their shares change hands, and it was something like 51%. But then by the 2000s, it was over 100%. And the only reason it was over 100%, so, shares just bouncing back left, right, and center, is because we had gotten to that stage within technology that say, for example, a rich person's portfolio, it would be exchanging and swapping shares with different companies every 4 seconds because of based on the stockbrokers' technology. And that's how they got their wealth. And that's the thing about the shares nowadays, especially in the US, is that if you have a tangible asset like a house, if you do anything with it, you will be taxed. But the thing is, you are only ever taxed with intangible assets, with, say, for example, with shares, when you receive a dividend. Anything out of after that, in terms of shares, you're not taxed.
Mm.
So a potentially a rich person is self-interested enough to pour a lot of their money into shares because those intangible assets are not
Mm.
taxed the same way
Mm.
as consumables or a house
Mm.
are.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, I think, the idea of, dealing with shares and like
Mm.
having someone like a broker that does it for you.
Yeah.
It's not like you're in it for the love of the stock market.
Mm.
Um, it's not like you're in there in Wall Street, calling the shots kind of thing, sell, 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 buy, buy, buy. You're not there because you're just some whiz kid with numbers and you love trading things like that, like playing cards and
Mm.
the playground at school. You're not in it for that type of passion. You're in it for the byproduct or the result. And so, like, if you hire someone to do all this, you know, um, magic card playing, let's call it, and just shifting things around endlessly, and never it landing any one place, just accumulating value as it's shifting around endlessly and almost aimlessly. Yeah, it's a complete self-interest without any focus on the process and the passion. I would say that 99% of people with shares then have actually no interest in the process at all.
Mm.
Um, they're just buying shares because they think that it's going to get them some type of result at the end. So it's the ultimate form of, yeah, self-interested practice, really. Because somebody else is doing all the work, some company, some worker, someone,
Mm.
and you're trading on imaginary value that exists in some, I don't know, imaginary digital space somewhere, and you're just getting in on that game as always, like I said, looking for that end result, which is just to accumulate more and more, as opposed to having any vested interest in the process. If anything, the process is just the hindrance, and it should be refined as much as possible with brokers and endless,
Mm.
card tricks, to try and make you as much value as possible. And so keep the card tricks coming, um, because who cares about the process really? It's something that should be changed on a whim in order to get more of that end result.
Yeah, and you do raise another good point, because this is another aspect of what the value of everything actually talks about, is that this short-termism ended up happening because uh, uh, investors didn't want any surprises. They wanted their good dividends, and they wanted them now. So the only reason the technology was used in such a way that you go from 50% to over 100% is
Mm,
because you had to maximize that shareholder value. You
mm,
had to keep the agent had to keep the principal happy,
mm.
and uh, once you live in a speculative world, then things just get out of control.
Yes. Yeah. There's nothing tangible about any of this. There's nothing real about any of this at all. Um, yeah, which is it's very interesting, to look at it from this perspective, because like there is no value created in that part of the world, like, or in that part of the economy, financialization, of economics. There's absolutely no value created, and there's no innovation in it, in the sense
Mm,
that there's nothing that's created there that adds, any type of product to
mm,
society that generates more wealth for everyone. It's just the wealth that is generated by people shuffling cards around and doing magic tricks,
mm.
supported by, as our mate Giannis would say, cash injections.
Yes.
See, in the old capitalist world, you either had substance and you traded off that substance, use that as leverage to get more capital, and so the beast went and stuff like that. And like
Mm,
everything was held together by a favorite system of yours, like the Bretton Woods system, which is like
mm,
backed by gold standard. Again, something tangible. But in the world we have now, where money is completely imaginary, it's not backed by anything physical, you have a lot more of this self-interested ability because
mm,
everything is imaginary. And so if they're continually printing money and pumping it into the system and giving it to bankers who just give to their friends to pay on financial markets, as opposed to creating any more additional value in the system, then there is just a whole culture of self-interested individualism, as opposed to having people that, because there is tangible connections to things like money
mm,
is connected to gold, which is actually a physical thing, and then that gives value. You don't have disinterested innovators that are driving the system
mm.
anymore. And so, like, we are in a very weird point now in late stage capitalism, as some would call it. Let's just call it 21st century capitalism, a
Mm.
neoliberal or post neoliberal world, depending on who you talk to. um, but, like, yeah, it seems to be very driven by this idea of self interest, no value creation, always looking at the end goal, which is just accumulating more money as opposed to creating capital.
Yeah, I guess I didn't go into this episode thinking we would end up critiquing this book. But yeah, I guess we kind of did. We said it didn't go far enough, and like this is what it kind of missed out on. And to be honest, I if I do come across something next time that uh I think it raises good points, but it doesn't quite get there, I think I might raise it again, and we can spend the podcast episode critiquing it because I think we kind of had a good discussion today.
Yeah, yeah, it was very interesting. Very interesting. Good choice. I didn't know where you were going with this 4IS when you told me just before we started. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit nervous, but you came out with some gold. It was a very interesting topic.
Okay, and of course, lastly, uh, that's synthwave art. So the prompt for this one is disinterest and self-interest fighting a war. And yeah, it's a very colorful one today, and
Mm.
I'll make sure to post it on my Facebook again. And thank you everyone for joining. Remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll give it to you, Mr. E.
Thank you very much, 4IS, and to all of you out there. Please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.